Hello and welcome to the Doomed Wyvern Gaming Guild channel once again for a glance at the Gazetteer for Hyperborea 3rd edition. And what a Gazetteer it is. I really like how this is basically written, from what I understand, as in the perspective of a sage, of the Sages Guild of Khromarium, sort of compiled in a in lore in a certain year by Kletos Herodotus in year 576. So the Hyperborea Gazetteer, like any good Gazetteer, kind of is also like an almanac. I think a lot of Gazetteers that I'm familiar with, which is kind of like an older tradition, having like a Gazetteer kind of brings me back to the Mystara world, where you have a different Gazetteer for each land. And so those are very much like local lore and rumors and history and events and local and the ruling lords and different things like that, imports, exports, city sizes and all this good stuff. Whereas this one has that maybe in less detail in some areas than I'd like, but also has a lot of sort of almanac type notes or of dates, festivals, calendar, really detailed calendar stuff, and sort of the inner workings of all of this. Like, this is something I love about, I love to see this in a system, but I am so out of the details, out of the weeds type DM, GM, referee, that I probably won't use, most of these things, like to the detail of the moon phases. Maybe if there's some implication of moon phases on content or lore or activities in the world that I should be aware of, then maybe I'll refer to them. But something like this is like, it's appreciated because you can kind of trust that the world is really well fleshed out, and potentially that's interesting. But it's maybe a little too in the weeds. Nonetheless, pretty cool. I'll probably only be referring to like the year. So these are actually, let me back up here. So I actually want to start with the calendar. So I think this is one of the unique things about Hyperborea. So it has a 13-year cycle, and the seasons are actually potentially multiple years, or they are all multiple years, like 1 to 2 years or 1.5 year here. So in the cyclical calendar, the 13-year Hyperborean Cycle, which is based on Clark Ashton Smith's Hyperborean Cycle, which I think is like a series of short stories. I think maybe I've only read one of them. Tell me if I'm wrong about that, or the better source material there if I'm wrong. The first year, you're the bear, then fish, wolf, hare, elk, tiger, crab, eagle, whale, aurochs, mammoth, fox, bat are sort of all the names of the year. And what's interesting is you have winter being multiple years, and spring and summer and fall each being multiple years. And the last year, the year of the bat, I believe, is entirely in darkness, actually. Using the cycle, periods of midnight sun and polar night. Each 13-year cycle includes 1 year of perpetual light and 1 year of perpetual darkness, which is very cool. I could see all sorts of like interesting modules that are interesting adventures you'd want to run in like a total year of darkness, right? Maybe there's sort of chaos and different things happening in a year where no one has light, or or their year of light might be something something equally interesting. But I just thought it was such an interesting kind of you can't just make the same assumptions about any other calendar. You can't make the same assumptions like, oh, this is going to be like roughly 12 months, and there are, but like if you look at Forgotten Realms calendar, the calendar of Harptos, if I remember correctly, it's basically our calendar. But something like this is, so the Gregorian calendar, but something like this is unique and very different. Like multiple year seasons, this whole 13-year cycle, a whole year of light, a whole year of darkness. Pretty interesting. Let's see what else to get into here. So I kind of wanted to jump off with the calendar there, but if we go back to the top, I won't read like everything to you. I think what I'm actually going to do is kind of jump into specific sections as per interest. And the nature of these videos that I do are basically trying to read and understand and learn the system along with you. And so don't expect me really to have kind of fully digested this and be able to explain it to you. I'm more so reacting, so you can kind of get my take and react for yourself. So the foreword starts, this chapter functions as a gazetteer, an encyclopedia of Hyperborea seen from the viewpoint of a sage in the city-state of Khromarium, which is the jewel of Hyperborea. If there were a sort of capital, this might be it, although, really the only powers are ones that can extend their influence out in some radius around their city-state. There's no sort of overlord or overlord, single ruling power, rather, of Hyperborea. But if there were a kind of an oldest, most important, or biggest city, it would be Khromarium. Information is Hyperborea, which has a diameter of about 3,000 miles, so roughly the extent of Earth's Arctic Circle. That's another really interesting thing too. We should talk about the sort of shape and layout of Hyperborea. So I don't have kind of all of the understanding just yet as to Hyperborea's history. Again, we're learning that together. But what struck me here is that it's really interesting. So this is the Atlas by Northwind Adventures, which I think is just really kind of a fascinating map, because you see Saturn here in the background, because Hyperborea, from so far as I understand, is a flat sort of hexagonal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, hexagonal flat world plane, sort of just a flat plane that floats behind or around or near Saturn. And the only continent, a singular continent, there are these outlying islands, and even like remnants of other islands. I think remnants of maybe Lemuria or Atlantis. And so everything that takes place is really on this, primary continent here. And when I first looked at this, I was thinking, wow, like where's the rest of it, right? You expect like your regular old traditional kind of fantasy map to be like maybe multiple continents or like one primary continent and some subcontinents or whatever, and it seems sort of small. But as you kind of dig into each area, which this atlas does a good job of kind of detailing each zone. So this red sector A here is the Lemurian Remnant, that's what it is. It's actually an adventure that I really want to run that looks really cool that's set on the Lemurian Remnant. How to get my players from where they are in the very southeast in Khromarium to here, and we'll figure that out. But each of these is sort of a detailed zoom-in portion. If I kind of skip you along here to the portion that is, I'm sorry, this is probably annoying visually, but if I skip you along to the portion wherein Khromarium resides, you'll kind of know where we're talking about here, right? So this is the Khromarian Steppe, the Fields of Vol, the Lug Wasteland. It's near New Vinland, which is where sort of the Viking-inspired areas, the Viking race kind of settled, and Vikland. I don't know much about Vikland. Looks like Oller's Island. That's a Norse kind of god, I think. So there's probably all Vikings here as well. Mount Ymir, that makes sense. So right down here is Khromarium. And so maybe we'll talk a little bit about Khromarium. Yeah. Apologies if this is kind of all over the place. This is just my style. I just kind of go with what's interesting next. So let's talk about Khromarium, because I bought two or three of the prefabricated modules from Northwind Adventures. Very excited to run them. And two of them I'm going to set in Khromarium. And so one is, let's see, they are Rats in the Walls, and there's 3 sort of sub-adventures in there. I think they all take place in Khromarium, and then maybe one other. So let's talk a little bit about Khromarium. So once regarded as the jewel of the kingdom of Hyperborea, the city-state of Khromarium demonstrates a history and predates the rise of mankind. Little doubt exists that this is the oldest city in the realm. Indeed, sages posit that the Khromarium spiral towers of black gneiss, I think it's nice, not nice, were not carved by human hands. Neither were they intended to accommodate bipedalism, but rather something altogether inhuman, which is really fascinating. It's sort of like, probably if I go back and read, I'm going to learn about, like snake people or something, or some other sort of inhuman thing ruling or inhabiting Hyperborea before, the Hyperboreans and then all the other races. But that's an interesting sort of hint at like a dim history that kind of no one remembers. Regardless of untold millennia, Khromarium served as the capital city of Hyperborea. Here reigned the Hyperboreans, a human race that ascended to sorcerous, scientific, and cultural heights theretofore unseen. As the Hyperboreans rose to prominence, they drove back the former rulers of the continent, the savage Vermes, which you should recognize from like Lovecraftian lore. Whilst Hyperborea was still just beyond the north wind of old Earth, deities such as Apollo and Artemis frequented this paradisal land of endless summer. The Hyperborean kingdom was vast and powerful from co-evals of Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu. It accepted tributes. In that bygone area, Khromarium was regarded as the premier cosmopolitan city of the world. Okay, so this is something that maybe we can sort out together, which is that Hyperborea, which is a word that's been around for a long time. I want to say this is Latin for like, well, I guess like north wind. The irony. And it basically referred to the land like very, very far north where these mystical people live, and it's sort of been a term that's a real term used in Earth history. And so far as I understand, Hyperborea was on old Earth, or our Earth, and somehow kind of got ripped out or transported as sort of like a surviving remnant of old Earth. Let's figure that out. Let's see the common brief history of Hyperborea. All right, maybe we'll find it in A Brief History of Hyperborea. Of the aeons before the rise of the Hyperboreans, little is known. Rare, forbidden tomes suggest that extra-dimensional beings arrived at old Earth shortly after the dawn of time, when the oceans roiled and meteors pounded the young planet. Evidence shows that these otherworldly races, Elder Things, the Great Race, and the Migo, engaged in countless wars over untold ages. More apparent, as demonstrated by the ruins scattered about the realm, is the ascendancy of the Snake Men. There you go, Snake Men. For uncounted ages before mankind rose from the lowly depths of apedom, those reptilian humanoids ruled the Hyperborean continent and beyond. Extant carvings suggest a prevailing tropical climate during the epoch of the Snake Men. Sages deduce that these super-intelligent creatures commanded sorceries and sciences scarcely since achieved. The reason for the fall of the Snake Man Empire has yet to be deciphered, though evidence suggests these lengthy conflicts with the Fishmen. That's interesting. The Vermes, or Beastmen, a race of quasi-men whose origins are traced back to the Spiral Mountain Array, which is here, right in the middle, which features the Yathaqua Plateau, which is cool. And they were next to rise to prominence, so the Vermes rose to prominence next. Some suggest that an otherworldly race catalyzed the Vermes from bestial obscurity to semi-intelligence and technological proficiency. Regardless, for an uncountable period, these apish humanoids dominated the planet. Ultimately, they regressed to their savage roots and betook themselves to the hoary depths of the Spiral Mountain Array. The rise of the Hyperboreans is mired in the embellished myths and legends of its people. Allegedly, this race of gaunt, pale-skinned sorcerer kings and witch queens are the progeny of the Boreads. This trio of supernaturally gifted giants engendered a paradisal land of eternal spring and sunshine beyond the north wind. Referring to the Boreads. The Boreads are held to have taken mortal wives and so begot Hyperboreans, a precocious race esteemed for their preternatural aptitudes and uncanny longevity. We have 2 in our party of 6 right now. I have 2 Hyperboreans. They happen to both roll the last name of Thune, which makes them brothers. And they, one is a magician, the other is a bard. They're roughly the same age. Some sages discount the tales of the Boreads. Indeed, they posit that Hyperboreans, much like the Vermes before them, may have been impelled by an unearthly sponsor. Most Hyperboreans vehemently reject this notion, naturally. Regardless, the Hyperborea became the most powerful realm of the antediluvian kingdoms, accepting tributes from coevals such as Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu, as we read before. The Hyperboreans knew not war, famine, disease, or hard toil, or the ravages of age, and they venerated Apollo, who was said to walk amongst them. Their empire was peerless, and they disparaged and trivialized the lesser races of mankind, whilst the Hyperboreans perfected their arts, sciences, sorceries, and most of the humans floundered in various stages of savage primitivism. Over time, the most puissant Hyperborean sorcerers were shown the eldritch secrets of Zathaqua, an otherworldly emigre, someone who came to, sort of immigrant, I guess, dwelling in the heart of the spiral mountain array. So Thaqua, as we just saw, right, here in the atlas, I assume this is what they're referring to. How do you pronounce this? What's the rest of this word? Vermithidon? That's a cool word. What is the rest of it here? Mount Vermithidon, right in the center of Hyperborean continent. We're going to have an adventure that goes there, right? It takes place there. Zathaqua sent select Hyperboreans on sojourns to Saturn and beyond. Very cool. And in due course, his glorification prevailed throughout the realm. The Sibyls, which I believe are like a sage or a seer, sorcerer of some kind, of Hyperborea, had long had presaged the advent of the ashen worm through geomancy, hydromancy, and hepatomancy. Hepatomancy being like the practice of reading the entrails and guts of sacrificed creature, so far as I understand. When all the portents of the worm's arrival were satisfied, and when at length it rose from the sea in its citadel of ice, the sorcerer kings and witch queens fled to their fastnesses beneath the spiral mountain array. So the Hyperboreans fled from Khromarium and wherever else to Spiral Mountain Array when the Ashen Worm, which is just some giant ice worm, I guess. I think that's also a reference to Clark Ashton Smith or maybe Lovecraft. Soon the worm affected thaumaturgy and mantled the once winterless realm in glacial ice. Hyperborea was swallowed, and a lost continent soon joined by its contemporaries, Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu. Aeons later, when the ice thawed and its mists parted, Hyperborea's connection to old Earth was no more than a mystical abstraction. Hyperborea found itself an isolated realm, its icy sea terminating in waterfalls that cascade into infinity, which is super cool. Like, it's referring to these sort of, I think, right? These sort of like constant, maybe they're waterfalls. It doesn't really quite look like it. I assume that they kind of fall off. Anyway, this sort of wind here is indicative of the north winds, I think, which sort of keep things on the planet. It keeps the planet held aloft, I suppose. Terminating in waterfalls that cascade to infinity. So the edge of the world, sort of flat Earth, or flat Hyperborea now, rather, just sort of flowing off the edge. And then these north winds. Beyond the world's rim lay the north wind, and beyond the north wind, the black gulf, or space, or the outer dark. Airless, black as pitch, and colder than any winter. A bloated red sun that shed little warmth wheeled around the horizon in a 13-year circuit, which is very cool. Yeah, just sort of like, it's sort of like, as opposed to going, up and around your Earth, this is just sort of like wheeling around the, the horizon. Does that mean that there's no nighttime, or like a very imperceptible night? I remember it now, attended by two ellipsoid moons. Very cool. One large and aquamarine, and the other small and ruddy brown. I kind of forgot that there were two moons. I would have described maybe the sky differently. Saturn was discernibly larger than any other stars in the firmament, of all of which shone dimmer, as though glimpsed through a smoky lens. Maybe they are in some sort of, not just out in space, they're in some sort of, contained dimension or something, or some sort of glass bauble of the gods or something. After the ice thawed, seeds took root and newly released pollens floated on the wind. Soon forests bristled in evolution. Hither came the savage races of non-Hyperboreans originating from old Earth, right? So sounds like on old Earth, the Ashen Worm arose in an ice citadel from the sea and cast a rime of frost all over a once eternal spring of Hyperborea, and then swallowed it, I suppose, and then mystically it appears out here in space, a sort of continent removed from its context and now floating on a hexagonal flat disk, which is just awesome. Please tell me if I got this wrong to your understanding, but that's what I'm going to run with when I. So at length, the Hyperboreans emerged from their sanctuaries below the Spiral Mountain Array. They beheld the astonishing changes to the world they once had known: the giant red sun, two ellipsoid moons, and soaring mountains. The race of sorcerers and witches descended to reclaim the jewel of their empire of old, Khromarium. And along the way, they noted the advent of terrible beasts and monsters, as well as the infiltration of savages. So that would be us, right? The savage races, who are now the Hyperboreans, which presumably once inhabited Earth with us, albeit at a far distant longitude. Now they're sort of forced to share this sole continent with us. So us being like the different races here, we talked a little bit about these in a different video, I think, but common being sort of like a mixed or indiscriminate race. The Amazonians, Atlanteans, Eskimos, Ixians, which I'm not sure if that's considered like an old Earth race, I suppose. Khromarians, Khromari Celts, so there's Celts. Sorry, I skipped over Celts. Picts, or sort of like the British Isles sort of Druid race, I think, and Half-Blood Picts, and of course, Vikings. We have in our group a Viking Paladin of Uller, who's just really fun to play, played by our friend Sean. Okay, so yeah, these latter were paid no more heed than apes or dogs to be slaughtered or enslaved, as whims dictated. So this is from the perspective of Hyperboreans, right? Love the art in this book. In the spiral towers of Khromarium, the Hyperboreans reassumed their power and station, and they languished in their superiority. No effort to expand the old Hyperborean kingdom was engendered. Forsooth, in truth, the sorceress race seemed content to remain in Khromarium, unconcerned of and unheeding of what transpired without. They entered an age of inestimable decadence and hedonism. They took to chewing lotus leaves, and of course, gotta have lotus leaves in sword and sorcery, and indulged in pleasures unspeakably perverse, and decadence, of course, and downfall. To wit, the Hyperboreans stagnated as the savages beyond the gates progressed. So turning of the tables, how the tables turn. That's an interesting sort of juxtaposition, sort of classic kind of Viking ship make, and these sort of twisted towers, presumably of Khromarium, sort of ancient make. Many generations later came to pass from a dimly lit, at length, dust faded. Okay, so this is a really interesting development, which I'm kind of weaving into the lore of one of my stories, albeit it's a distant fact. So from the dimly lit heavens descended a silvery green comet that burned across the Hyperborean sky for 20 days and nights. In its wake fell showers of dust and particles that blanketed the whole of the realm in a putrid greenish hue. On the trees, earth, hills, and mountains, plains and tundra, and even the surface of the water, the eldritch dust was omnipresent. So it kind of harkens back to the color out of space, the name of it. At length, the dust faded, but soon after arose the plague known as the Green Death. It swept across the realm, extinguishing savage and civilized people alike. Khromarium, for instance, was left a lifeless husk, and a few among the ancient race of lotus-chewing sorcerers escaped to their old shelters in the Spiral Mountain Array. I wonder if they're still there. Let us read on, and maybe we'll wrap at this. Countless ruins were left in the plague's wake. Pictish fortresses, Viking colonies, Celtic towns, Eskimo fishing villages, and more. Nomadic tribes such as the Khromarians carried the disease with them across the Hyperborean plains, and the Amazon trading ships brought it back to their island nation. Mistake. Sages suggest that perhaps 90% of mankind was wiped out by the Green Death. Presumably, Hyperboreans kind of considered mankind. Centuries later, barbarian refugees were among the first to rebound, and they reclaimed Khromarium, and presently their descendants rule it as a city-state, which is so cool. The Green Death, having taken its toll a millennium ago, is the measuring stick by which modern Hyperborean history is traced. The bulk of pre-Green Death history, as illustrated by the brevity of this treatise, is a casualty of a bygone age. Furthermore, the intervening centuries betwixt the plague years and the recovery are widely regarded as the Dark Age. The plague's impact on the bestial and otherworldly races of Hyperborea is nebulous. Little doubt exists that these creatures proliferated about the realm, perhaps emboldened by mankind's regression, or, more frighteningly, wholly irrespective of its position. I love the way this author writes. And so here is so after mankind entered the Common Era, so CE, Common Era, CAE, whatever. After mankind endured the plague for the Green Death and the ensuing Dark Age, a new age of enlightenment commenced. Steve Dionysus Exiguus. Okay, not even gonna engage with that. So begin the rebirth. Okay, so there's a neat little table of notable events, which every good gazetteer should have. You see before Common Era and Common Era. So this was when so year one basically is established when the Sages Guild forms, and they're also the one who's authoring this treatise that we just read, right? And the Sages Guild of Khromarium, a dark age ends. So anything the interceding years between the Green Death nearly annihilates mankind. Plague ushers in a dark age. So all of this, roughly 500 years BCE to 1 or Genesis. At first, it looks like roughly 30 years with Genesis. Was known as the Dark Age, and now we're sort of living post that. And so I guess 576, which is when I started my campaign, is when the Gazetteer of Hyperborea is completed by the Sages Guild of Khromarium. So a quick note about the Sages Guild. Well, let's just talk a little bit about that guild and Khromarium and kind of how I plan to run it and how I think about it. So I've read, smatterings of this and here as much as will hold my attention and as much time as I have. And I've read through the Khromarium, sorry again for all the scrolling. So, and so I've read through this and a good deal of the sort of outlying lands. It's really important to me that when I run this for my crew, to present the world and as a macro example and Khromarium as a micro example of something that smacks of I guess all of the buzzwords of that are sort of listed as describing this game: sword and sorcery, science, fantasy, weird, fiction, cosmic horror. I want this to feel different, darker, stranger. I want my players to have to inhabit a different mindset in order to make sense of this world. And so, like when describing things, for example, such as the Sages Guild, in like Forgotten Realms, you might look at something like, I don't know, Candlekeep, or just sort of like a Eurocentric style, medieval inspired keep of some kind, or hall of records of some kind with, robed sages, and just everything seeming sort of like wholesome and normal and earth inspired. But we're definitely not, we're earth adjacent, I suppose. We were once earth races, but a lot has happened to these people who are inheriting or sort of reclaiming multiple times over the centuries this jewel of Hyperborea, right? So it was built by who knows who, I guess the Snake Men, and we could read more and find out. So I love that notion that we're inheriting sort of this alien architecture and kind of making it our own. We're trying to figure it out as we go. Maybe there are like unforeseen magics or technologies that we bump into. We have to reconcile what is that, and like, is this a, maybe they find some kind of computer and they're like, is this a god? I really like this image here. And I wanted to, and again, like, and these towers in the back, which almost look high tech, and I wanted to bake this in, sort of like, I considered having like, maybe there's these archways in between the different parts of the city with these kind of like just sort of deadpan eyes which just observe, and like, who knows even, and I thought like, okay, well, who owns them and who runs them and what are they for? And I just want to leave all that unexplained. Like, who knows? And like, maybe it's the Sages Guild, or maybe some ancient AI that runs these things looking for, whatever. Maybe they assess you as a threat when you do something. Maybe they don't. I don't know. I just am inspired by the evocative imagery and the words used, but more so, I'm just trying to kind of push it just beyond the realm of where you can easily drop in all of your sort of like high fantasy concepts, right? There are, for example, like there are orcs in this, which is okay. I'm kind of disappointed by that. Maybe I'll just turn them into something a little bit different. I want no cultural touchstones. I want no conventional things that you can easily reference and know what it is from your previous play experiences. There are elves and dwarves, and everyone kind of knows what elves and dwarves are. But in this, I think there are elves. Sorry if That's not right. There are dwarves, but they're non-playable. You play as humans only, or Hyperboreans or Atlanteans, and dwarves are evil. Like I don't want you to be able to, as a player in this campaign that I'm running, have too many points of reference that then make you comfortable, or I'm going to say lazy, but it's not, you're using the classifications in your mind to move quickly through the decisions and make sense out of the world. I really kind of want to avoid all that. So turn things on its head a little bit. Like, and seeing this picture, I almost was thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool if there's just sort of these massive, like, eyes, like this one, sort of like cloaked in giant, what look like literal cloaks, just sort of flapping languidly above the city. And like, no one even knows really who runs them, if anyone, or what they do. But there's just sort of this weird thing that maybe as an outsider, you walk into the city, you're like, what the hell is that? And that's the kind of thing that I'm really after. I described one of my players in some downtime on the Rats in the Walls mission was trying to hawk some relics that he found, some ancient Hyperborean relics that he found, and during downtime, and we had him not be able to sell these kind of relics, which were some pauldrons and a ceremonial dagger, or a more decorative dagger rather. And he couldn't really find a smith who was convinced by their authenticity, so he had to actually appeal to the antiquarians of the Sages Guild. And I don't know if there are antiquarians in the Sages Guild in the book, but they are in mine. I sort of divided the Sages Guild between like historians and antiquarians, and then sort of like consultants, or people who would parlay with nobles or consult on matters of like astrology and things like that. And so I'll read you, if you'll be so kind as to listen. I'll read you sort of my little description of how I think about the Sages Guild and like what it feels like or looks like to go inside there. And again, this is for one of my players. I wrote this as sort of like a side scene. I just like to share this with you. I do a lot of this kind of stuff on the side in between sessions. And so this is for Mateos, the assassin mentioned in previous videos. We've kind of walked over the different subclass abilities. So one of his comrades, Velmor, the warlock, was almost killed in the second session. And so he's resting. And so while Velmor rests, Mateos slips out into the rain-slick alleyways of the harbor district of Khromarium to find a buyer for the relics he collected from a skeletal sorcerer. And I tend to think of Khromarium as, like, I really like this description of these kind of towers or archways or sort of vaulted structures of this black gneiss, this sort of, what is gneiss again? It's a volcanic rock. Anyway, sort of in these otherworldly or inhuman shapes, right? We're told that they're not really designed, maybe there are no stairs so much as there are ramps or things like that. And so it almost is like weird architecture, sort of, maybe is inspired by relief. And but the areas that are inhabited by people, such as the tavern that they start off in, is sort of like humans kind of adapting to the architecture that's there and kind of making makeshift alleyways into places of operation and business, places of business. And maybe there are like plenty of buildings on the side of these alleyways which they could go into, but they're actually kind of like afraid. Like they don't want to use these kind of haunted, ancient kind of buildings. And so they're like tucked in alleyways, like a whole tavern that's tucked in an alleyway and like a makeshift board roof that's kind of constructed in the second level of the alleyway above it. Anyway, that's how I described it to this crew and the Tavern of the Silvery Eel where they're staying. So nonetheless, Mateo slips out into the rain-slick alleyways of the harbor district, and so goes the little vignette. All the smiths you visit are unconvinced of the authenticity of the relics that you offer, and they offer you insultingly low sums. After a full day of hawking to no avail, you decide to try the antiquarians of the Sage Guild, though you know that accessing these aristocrats will take some work. You follow a group of them in their pale yellow robes as they exit one of the guild's vaulted towers of black gneiss. Nice. Gneiss? You overhear one of them announce his sabbatical that starts on the morrow. Master Drakon, a Khromarium, who apparently specializes in lore of old Earth. You take notes of his appearance, study his mannerisms, gait, and voice pattern. So as a reminder, Mateos is an assassin who has a really gifted ability to disguise himself and pretend to be others. So that's his plan here. The next morning, your initial entry into the tower as a master sage raises no eyebrows. Mimicking Draken's slight limp, you traverse endless corridors which spiral upward through the tower and glimpse into countless windowless rooms. Green candles, which neither flicker nor give off heat, light up everything and subtly pulsate in union. The sages therein are still like statues and maintain a code of pensive silence. At length you find a brass placard announcing the office of a one Master Godric, an Anglo-Saxon by the name, whose purview is Hyperborean relics. You spy shelves of tomes, potsherds, and objects for which you have no point of reference. Glancing up only briefly, Godric acknowledges your rank, signified by the ochre robes, and bids you welcome. He easily recognizes these artifacts as being made by ancient Hyperboreans, but frowns as they are in a state of disrepair. He expects you to offer them freely into the commission of his office, as is expected by fellow sages. Your suggestion of payment, however, causes him to fix eyes on you in consternation, and it is at this point that he sees through your disguise. Godric seems less alarmed than you are, and calmly demands to know where you retrieve these items from. Fearing the guard, you divulge that they come from, quote, what seemed to be a priest's chamber in a forgotten temple to Auroras. Again, if you're running rats in the walls, post spoiler alert for players out there. But if you're running rats in the walls, you'll understand kind of what's going on here. Squint-eyed, he nods and then offers to buy them from you at a reasonable price and promises not to raise the alarm if you reveal to him the location of the temple. Anticipating your compliance, he rolls out a map of the city. So then I pose the question to the player, our player Patrick, who runs Mateos, and he basically tries to counter offer, asking how much for this information, and basically they land on a deal where Master Godric will pay him for the relics and the information, and if he helps him clear it out, such that he and his group of sages can go at a later time and delve into it and find any other relics, then he will pay him for the other half of the coinage. And at some point, Mateo says, like, "We'll go grab your coin and come with me, and we'll see what's in there," because he's trying to lowball Mateos. And my response to that was that Godric grows uncomfortable at the notion, unconsciously clutching a nearby artifact, which no doubt represents the safe confines of his guild office. He looks down and to the side, thinking, "All right, you show me the exact location and clear the place of whatever haunts it, and I shall pay you the 1,000 gold and assure your safe retreat from our tower." He stares at you, obviously eager to plumb the depths of the temple made safer by your efforts. And so this is just the first kind of picture that I've painted for our group on one of these guilds of Khromarium, and it just kind of occurred to me as I went along. I didn't think too much about it, but just kind of pulling on some of the some of the tropes in terms of like green, eerie green flame or pale yellow robes, and not so much tropes, but maybe sort of sword and sorcery or Lovecraft mythos inspired. So that's the first kind of glimpse that our PCs have into any establishment in Khromarium. I think in addition to that, I read that the orthodoxy of Zathakwa is a predominant faith in all of Hyperborea, and I think including Khromarium. And so I decided to embellish that a little bit when one of the players tried to go to a nearby temple, a temple of Zathakwa nearby to the Silvery Eel, and try to identify one of the potions they discovered therein. Again, spoilers, sorry. And so I thought, okay, it can't be like any other, let's say, Forgotten Realms type temple where you go in and it just feels like, I don't know, some Catholic temple that maybe you've seen, like some kind of cathedral with a tithing box and holy water and pews and things. And so I thought it would be interesting if just the whole thing was filled with kind of a smoke or incense, which is designed to put you in a a psychedelic state so that you're more sort of susceptible to the influences of this giant Zathaqua idol. And I thought it's really important because like even in old Earth, idols were actually considered to be in many respects, I think this is maybe Greece and Rome and maybe other places, the idols were actually intended and understood to be the gods themselves or the goddesses themselves and embodiments of those beings. And so I thought that should be really present. Like, what's cooler than this giant toad god idol, right? And so that it should be considered as actually the embodiment or actually Zathaqua sitting at the end of this smoke-filled chamber, and therefore you shouldn't, look at it. You shouldn't look at it too long, or you should never touch it, and different things like that. And you should bow, sort of keep your head down the entire time, unless you're one of the priests, and you can keep your head up, but you don't want to turn your back on this statue. Or it's just sort of like weird little rules and customs that are going to make it feel just a little different enough from typical European clergy or ecclesiastical fare. And so that the priests of Zathaqua deal almost entirely in incense and oils and unguents that are meant to be like ingested or lit and combusted and like inhaled. And I thought it'd be interesting if like, okay, maybe a priest of Zathaqua could sell a healing potion or effectively what has the same mechanical benefit as a healing potion, but is actually like an incense that you have to light, and then you put like a towel over your head and maybe breathe it in. It takes like 10 minutes or something, but somehow magically heals you. Maybe by doing that, it also opens you up to some kind of weird influence from Zathaqua. And I think the clergy of this temple kind of had from their eyebrows up and over their head sort of this black paint, sort of greasy black paint, which you look at and you think, oh, it's just paint. Then you kind of get another glance at it, like, is that like black blood or oil or something? And I just kind of wanted these guys to be odd. Because they spent, decades or whatever inhaling these strange, substances that connect them with Zathaqua, which is, of course, this being which can hurl you to other planes, whether physically or astrally, maybe. So maybe these guys are like completely detached from their physical form since they spend so much time in the ethereal or astral or what have you. So just finding little ways to kind of flesh out and add flavor to some of the great, inspiration that's already here. And I think a lot of DMs, I'm definitely a DM that I need to make a space my own and add these little flair. And it also actually helps me remember it for whatever reason. As I'm creating, it's instilled in my memory a bit better. And so it makes it easier for me to kind of keep the lore tangible if I can kind of recall it on the fly and think, oh, I remember what, clergy of Zathaqua do because we created it at one point. I also like for the players to kind of give reaction and influence to these kind of things, and then I'll incorporate something. They may ask a question about, about the clergy, and I'll have some sort of controversial response to it, or I'll subvert their expectation. I can't think of a clean example right now, but I'll kind of subvert their expectation for what this priest should be like, and that kind of sticks in their memory as well, or so I'd like to think. So anyway, I'll stop it there, about 45 minutes, and a glimpse into the Gazetteer. It's a long read. I couldn't probably get through the whole thing with you. So highly recommend, the forward, the calendar, just at a glance, at least the timeline. So like something like this, again, like interesting. I'm never going to use it in terms of like the daylight time throughout the years. But A Brief History of Hyperborea, definitely a good read. And then wherever you're starting off your campaign, maybe it starts off in, Minotaurios, which I guess there are Minotaurs in this. Pretty cool. Probably you have a chance to make Minotaurs your own. Again, this is, also inspired by, Greek, pantheons. Some of the Greek pantheons make an appearance here. Everyone kind of in D&D world knows like what a Minotaur is and kind of what they do. Maybe you should make it a little bit your own in this, make it a little different. Again, like I think like systems like this, they're just begging for the oddity to be the norm, if that makes sense. And so that's what I'm striving to do. So I'll give you a couple like little vignettes of how I'm thinking about running Hyperborea. And yeah, leave me a comment. Let me know what's something that you do. And also, I hope I didn't spoil the Rats in the Walls adventure for anyone who's actually going to be a player in that. I do recommend that one. I recommend the whole trio of adventures that come in that. They all are really good reads. And so far, Rats on the Walls is a really great play. We're on our third session. So thanks for joining the Doomed Wyvern Gaming Guild.